This is Simona Mangiante Papadopoulos. Today we sit with Ambassador Dmitry Poliansky, Russia's Deputy Permanent Representative to the United Nations. In a moment where global tensions, sanctions, and media narratives often dominates headlines, I wanted to take a step back and hear directly from the Russian perspective how Moscow views its role on the world stage, the impact of Western sanctions, and even the long shadow of the Russiagate scandal. Ambassador, my first question is about actually the role of Russia within the United Nations. Actually, for the audience who might not know, Russia is one of the 5 permanent members of the United Nations Security Council, a position that carries an enormous privilege but also an enormous responsibility. At such polarized times where Russia's been, I would say, gaslighted by the entire world with fake narratives, how do you interpret and how do you navigate this role?
Well, it's of course, as you rightly said, it's a big responsibility, and the world is indeed polarized, and very much depends on the Security Council and on the P5, and P5 are split on a lot of issues. Still, we try to find common ground, which is not easy sometimes, but in any case, we manage to speak, we manage to interact with each other regardless of our national or level of our national relations, which is sometimes far from what people would expect. So Russia is acting as a responsible player. Today actually we are completing the 31st of October. We are completing 1 month of our presence in the Security Council, which was very intense. A lot of meetings, a lot of debates. A lot of things happened, and we were kind of navigating Security Council through these waters. I think everybody was satisfied, and everybody welcomed our ascending to the Security Council presidency and said very good words today as well.
That's very important to know whether the United Nations are still a place for conversation rather than confrontation when it comes to sensitive issues on global topics like Russia role in the global geopolitical balances.
Well, of course, there are countries that are very much anti-Russian, but they feel themselves right now isolated. For example, recently when we organized a debate on the 80th anniversary of the adoption of UN Charter, some countries wanted to orchestrate a stakeout, media stakeout with condemnation of Russian aggression, whatever, in Ukraine. They managed to get only 45 countries that would be there out of 193. So it shows, of course, the level of rejection of this kind of divisive initiatives right now by wider UN membership. And this is encouraging. So yes, of course, there are countries that try to be aggressive, but most countries are very much interested towards our position. We have been consistently explaining our reasoning for many years. I'm here for 8 years already almost, and I remember how we explained, how we predicted all the problems that would emerge, consistently warning our partners and colleagues of what might happen if we do not take necessary step, but we were not heard, and there was a very difficult period for some year, maybe a year or so, when many countries were disoriented and overwhelmed by the events, and they couldn't figure out what was really happening. But I think we managed to bypass this period quite quickly. Now we have dialogue with almost everybody, including some of the Western countries, because there is no other way but to speak, and United Nations, of course, provide very good platform for this. It's the only unique universal organization where we have all 193 members sitting in one hall, speaking together, and we believe that diplomacy should prevail in any case, whatever we think about each country, whatever is the level of our bilateral relations. But we need to speak to each other, we need to be open-minded, and we need to promote dialogue and diplomacy.
You also have been very vocal about how distorted the narrative about the conflict Ukraine-Russia has been. I feel, as a Western journalist, that the issue has been oversimplified in this binary lens of aggressor against invaded. I believe this has distorted perception about the real roots of this conflict. How would you address that if you are to talk to not United Nations, but to simplify the concept to a common audience?
It's very painful for me to watch what has happened with the media in Europe, in some of the Western countries, because the discussions that are happening there are very shallow. And you're absolutely right that they usually try to bypass the real core root causes of the problem. For many of those who criticize Russia right now, history started only in February 2022, and there was nothing before that. But we were consistently warning that the problems are accumulating, that this bubble of problems is about to explode. We were saying that Security Council is failing its preventive role while not addressing the challenges that were coming because of Ukraine not implementation of Minsk agreements.
Yes.
We were doing this consistently for many years, so it was looming. Everybody was understanding that something will happen, and now the narrative is like there is this white and fluffy Ukraine, and angry, aggressive Russia, and Ukraine is a beacon of democracy and freedom of belief, whatever, human rights, which is absolutely not the case. So I think that Europeans, to a large extent, are the hostages of this bubble of lies that has been inflated around Ukraine. Ukraine being, of course, a Western project. Ukraine, also known as anti-Russia. I think that's the real label of what was implemented in Ukraine. And so they are being dragged by this logic. They are being dragged by the statements that were already made. They invested a lot in this regime. And now it's very hard for a lot of European governments to embrace the truth. But I feel that more and more the civil society, independent journalists are starting to ask questions, what it is all about, how will it end, and what are the root causes? Because root causes is a key to solving this issue, and we were very consistent about it. We are consistent about it. We believe that if there is a sustainable long-term settlement of this issue, then of course we should address the root causes to prevent such things to happen again.
You mentioned the Minsk agreements, 2014 and 15. Many speculate that if the Minsk agreement were correctly implemented, that we probably would have avoided all these conflicts. Some call them wars, some other call aggression. But in reality, if we look back and we study a little bit the history of this region, and we look also at the Crimea, which is the first flashpoints to understand. Even in this case, the self-determination through the referendum showed that a volunteer to annex to the West, to annex to Russia. So in this extent, do you think that the hostility of the West that denied legitimacy to this self-determination act has impacted also trust into the Minsk agreement to unfold correctly?
I think that what we are facing right now, to a large extent, is a crisis of trust, because the trust has been lost, especially after this non-implementation of Minsk agreements. And this was clear already for some time. And also there are absolutely egregious double standards on behalf of the West. You mentioned Crimea, which took a decision because on the basis of a referendum. And I think that there are no doubts absolutely in the West that overwhelming majority of Crimeans are in favor of being with Russia and were as such at this time. But let's take Kosovo, for example. In Kosovo, there was no referendum. There was such an arbitrary decision to grant independence to this region in breach to the resolution 1244 of the Security Council. And the West is pretending that this is the way it should be. So double standards, of course, is something that we shouldn't implement. In this case, And you mentioned Minsk agreements. Yes, Minsk agreement was they were a good chance for Ukraine to kind of come back to its senses, because we didn't have any, and it's not about territory. Everything that is happening is not about territory, not about turf. It's about people. It's about human rights. It's about the right of Russian-speaking population of Ukraine, which represents the majority of the population, to remain themselves, to teach Russian to their children, to speak Russian, to honor the heroes that they want to honor, and not Hitler collaborators. And in many countries, it is something automatic, but this is something that is being rejected to the Russian-speaking population of Ukraine for political reasons. So we didn't have any territorial claims to Ukraine. We didn't want to take back Crimea. We had a very good bilateral treaty. Everything was going okay. But then the West, step by step, started to implement this nationalistic agenda in Ukraine. And this Maidan coup in 2014 was the apex of this situation. And after this coup, when they started the war against the population in the east and in the south, against Russian-speaking population, Minsk agreements were a very good formula for them to take back the control of the eastern and southern borders, to take back the control of the border between Ukraine and Russia, provided, of course, they made certain steps. But they didn't, and they didn't want it. And we now know from the revelations of some ex-politicians that this was only a smokescreen for preparing Ukraine for a war with Russia. And that's why we can say that there is absolutely no trust, and we will not tolerate any new Minsk agreements. We do not trust the West. Of course, we do not trust the Kiev regime. And that's why the solution that might end all this should be absolutely of different kind.
That comes to my next question. It was basically, it's correct to say it's a matter of identity more than territory when it comes to the Russian feeling about Russian language as well. And we have seen in Maidan and also a different color revolution when it came to Yanukovych and Yushchenko and this attempt of the European Union to first reject Ukraine and now coming back in place with this almost philanthropic speech about aiding humanitarian aids to Ukraine, regardless all the history that many people don't know how many times the European Union has rejected Ukrainian action based on corruption, right? So I was working at the European Union at the time. But one other point which is really important for me, like when we talk about trust and we talk about the United States attempting also to be a mediator, facilitating this peace agreement between Ukraine and Russia. Like just recently, we were expecting this meeting to happen in Hungary between President Trump and President Putin. It didn't happen in the end. But what are the real conditions that Russia would eventually accept to end diplomatically this conflict?
We want to have back a normal neighbor at our borders. We don't want to have there a nationalistic hornet's nest that really affects our security. There are a lot of root causes to this conflict. One of them, of course, is a bigger dimension of European security architecture, which was absolutely undermined by the enlargement of NATO. This is one element. But the other one is, of course, the question of identity. And I can imagine that for those who are not well aware of what is happening, they might have a very distorted picture. But in order to understand, I can give you an example. As Europeans, let's imagine that in Belgium, for example, there is a Flemish nationalist party taking over the whole of Belgium and saying that French is forbidden from now on. And not only forbidden, but they start some military campaign against Ardennes, against all other things. I wonder what will be the attitude of France towards this. Will they just say that it's okay, it's not a problem, it's their choice? Of course, there will be a backslash there because they understand that this is a question of identity. There is not a single region in Europe or elsewhere where people are being deprived their identity for political reasons. Again, even Ukraine is the only country that on the one hand has Russian language status in the constitution, which is not being implemented. On the other hand, it has the laws that ban use of Russian language at the state level. Israel is not banning Arabic in its regardless of all the problems. Point. Arabic countries do not ban Hebrew. The only country is Ukraine. So Europeans just don't want to see this problem which is being happening under their nose, and also they are still keen to keep this bubble of lies, this kind of a warm bath, where they found themselves by creating many years this impression that Ukraine is better than Russia, that Ukraine is democratic, that there is no corruption, that Ukraine is on the way to the European Union. They should wake up, and this awakening, it might be painful, of course, I understand, but it's the only way to come back to normalcy and to make the situation in Europe normal again. And we are far from this right now, and I believe that unfortunately Europe is still kind of living in a rosy world as far as Ukraine is concerned, and they don't want to see the reality, the harsh reality that is happening there, that this project has failed, and that this project was anti-Russian and it was flawed from the outset. And now it's high time to make necessary steps to correct it before it is too late. But on the contrary, what we hear right now, we hear that the dominant narrative in Europe right now is that Russia is an enemy, that Europe should prepare for the war with Russia, that Russia will attack whatever Europe will do. And this is very dangerous, because this is a brainwashing exercise of young generation of Europeans who maybe do not understand the peculiarities of where we are. This is not the response that respectful politicians should do, and diplomats. I think that they are idle to a certain extent and not trying to find a way out, which can be found regardless of all the problems that came up. But still it can be found, provided we speak to each other, provided we want to find a solution.
Also from the European perspective, European Union, these sanctions and these measures are suicidal. Europe is collapsing under the weight of its own sanctions. Russia has always been a big business partner, importing gas, mostly in Italy, my country, where I come from. And the prices of inflation have been very high. But nevertheless, it looks like European Union is more sacrificing its own economic and political interests for a blind alliance and loyalty to Washington. So how do you see Europe becoming again an interlocutor which is independent from this lead that, of course, is moved by completely different interests? It's not in the interest of the European Union, basically, to implement the sanctions to Russia.
It's hard to imagine, frankly, positive scenario for Europe right now, because, it is very difficult for us to forbid Europe to shoot in both of its legs if Europe wants to do it, and that's what Europe did with these energy prices and all these things. So instead of profiting from Russia being close neighbor in proximity to Europe and having all these cheap energy resources, Europe now chooses to get another dependence on the United States or on spot market for energy prices, which is not a sustainable policy. But we can't help it. It's your choice. It's up to you to do it. As far as Russia is concerned, I think that those who visit Russia, they see that sanctions played a very positive role in the development of my country, because for a long time there was a discussion, long before all these problems, that we should be self-sustainable, that we should develop domestic tourism, that we should not kind of take capitals out of Russia. All these things were theoretic, but when it came to the real problem, the sanctions from the West, then this mechanism started to work. And now Russia is to a large extent self-sustainable. We rely less and less on dollar in our trade and on euro in our trade with external partners. There is a clear pivot to the east, which was also proclaimed for many years, but for certain reasons we were not doing it, and we will absolutely easily find a market for those energy resources that Europe doesn't want to have. So again, this is a very strange policy, and of course it will backfire, and I believe that unfortunately, Europe is the main loser of this situation, regardless of how it will end. Europe is a loser because Europe has lost its clout, it's lost its its economic backbone, and now it is very dependent on external players like United States. Such countries as Germany, Italy, France, which were also the backbone of European economy, they are very much weakened, and they have structural problems, unfortunately. But the key issue is also, I'm not trying to profit anything, but the key issue, unfortunately, is the European structures, European Union, European Commission. I was a big fan of European Union. I spent 15 years working with the EU. I spent some time in Brussels. And the European Commission, the European Union of the edition of beginning of 2000s is absolutely different what you have right now. So this is kind of a very strange people which are not elected, which are being appointed, and which are very Russophobic, which are very xenophobic, and which have very vague knowledge of economy, of whatever. But they have their own agenda, and nobody knows who kind of authorized them to pursue this agenda. And this is a question for Europe. So this perversion of European Union, perversive version of European Union, is very dangerous. It's dangerous to everybody, not only to Russia, but to everyone else. It's up to you to decide what to do, but I really hope that Europe will come to its senses. Maybe this process will go through the revival of kind of processes in some national countries, because this is how it happened all the time. But so far, it's absolutely clear that this European integration ship is sailing nowhere, and this is very, very obvious for us, unfortunately.
It is, and actually it's pretty obvious that sanctions are not affecting Russia, but are affecting the countries that are issuing those sanctions. And just recently, United States issues another round of sanctions to Russia. I believe more in an attempt to replace diplomatic negotiations with sanctions. So are sanctions the new language of diplomacy, and how effective they are?
Even before they were introduced, most of the experts were saying that they will not affect not Russian economy, neither Russian economy nor the kind of prospects of the resolution of the conflict. We understand that President Trump is under enormous pressure within the country. He has some internal calculations. Also, he is under pressure from Western allies, and he has to show that U.S. is resolute, that U.S. is still remaining in this on its basic positions. But this will be, of course, detrimental by introducing new sanctions. They playing a very risky games, because they risk undermining energy market, and if prices go up, this will be very detrimental for U.S. producers. And a lot of people are warning that this is a possible scenario. Again, this is up to the U.S. I don't think that Russia will be affected in any way or in any significant way, and that's what's happening right now. But sanctions, of course, they can't be a substitution for diplomacy. I can also quote my president recently saying that not a single country that respects itself will act under pressure and under duress. So I think that all those who want to speak with us the language of the sanctions, they should remember this.
That's very important to highlight the mindset that goes behind these attempts of negotiations through force. But I think it's pretty obvious that sanctions are really affecting the gas prices, and indirectly, even the sanction issued by the United States affecting Europe. It comes to a lack of trust and years of hostility. And there is something that I would like to address with you, is the recent indictment of James Comey, the former FBI director. He was indicted for perjury and obstruction of justice in pursuing this fake, operation that wanted to widely debunk that sees again Russia at the center of this undermining political discourse, trying to fabricate a collusion in the election of Donald Trump in 2016. In some extent, do you think this, now everything is debunked, accountability is on its way, do you think this has affected or still affects diplomatic relations between Russia and the United States?
I think that a lot of those decision makers in the US, they understand that this whole construction, anti-Russian construction, was built on a very flawed basis. But there is a big inertia in this, and it's very hard. The problem with sanctions is that it's very easy to introduce sanctions, but it's not very easy to curb them back. And that's exactly the issue. You mentioned this hoax with the Russia collusion, Trump collusion, whatever. And there is a paradox that on the one hand, President Trump is the one who is most affected by this. They tried to tarnish his reputation. They tried to undermine his campaign. They failed. But the bulk of the sanctions that the United States introduced to Russia came because of this alleged collusion. Mm-hmm. And they are not repealed. They're still there. Of course, there is something on top of them right now. But the basis is kind of shaped because of this collusion allegations. I can give you only one example. I came here at the beginning of 2018 when this was very top on the agenda. And at the end of 2016, President Obama, who already knew that the next president will be Donald Trump, he introduced a number of sanctions, including he just took away from us one of our diplomatic objects here in New York, and other was taken in Washington, citing this kind of Russia meddling in U.S. elections hoax. And it is still there. Nobody returned to us this object. Nobody apologized for this, though everybody knows now officially that this is a hoax. But the sanctions is there. Russia is still bad. Again, it means that the problem is not in Russia. The problem is not how Russia behaves. The problem is attitude towards Russia, perception of Russia as an enemy, as a foe. And unfortunately, most of the people here, regardless of whether they belong to Trump camp or to other camp, they still are quite comfortable wearing these optics, and they don't want to change it. And this is a problem because they need to change these optics. They need to be open-minded and to see why we went there. And if they want only to blame Russia, of course, we are not going anywhere. But they need to see what they themselves have done wrong, not only US, but also Europe. And if there is such a process, if there is such a self-analysis of what went wrong and why, then we can hope for some brighter future. If not, if there's still a perception that Russia is an enemy no matter what, I'm afraid that we're not heading for very positive times ahead.
I cannot disagree with you. And definitely one last question. I want to take your time. There is a lot of misinformation, misrepresentation, mischaracterization of Russia, demonization of Russia. So to retrieve a dialogue with between East and West, do you think it's possible? And if yes, where this conversation should start?
We never walked away from the dialogue, by the way. From day one, President Putin, everybody else were saying that we're open to the dialogue. If you look at our statements in the Security Council during this period of Ukraine crisis, you will see that from day one we said that we are ready and we would prefer to achieve the goals of our special military operation by diplomatic means, not by military means. We said it from day one, but nobody wanted to listen to us. Nobody wanted to kind of shake the hands that we were handing out. It's not Russia that stopped the dialogue. It's the French, the Germans, Italians, all the others. They say we will not speak with Russia anymore. We're here. We're there. We went nowhere. When President Macron wanted to call President Putin picked up the receiver. So he didn't say that I don't want to speak to you. If somebody else wants to call President Putin or Minister Lavrov, no problem. Here at the UN, again, there is an absurd situation when a lot of European diplomats start to speak to us in the couloirs, but they are afraid to be kind of pictured speaking to us because they are afraid of Brussels. They're not afraid of Berlin, of Rome. They are afraid of Brussels. They're afraid that in Brussels they will be kind of, figure pointed as enemies of the progressive world, colluding with Russia, whatever. This is a very strange situation. This is a bit childish sometimes. But this is the reality. So we never interrupted this dialogue. We were always open to speak with whoever wanted to speak with us. And this is the case right now. We don't bear grudges against anyone if people we are higher than this. If people understand that certain things were done in a wrong way, and if they want to make amends, they're most welcome, no problem. We are in favor of dialogue, and people know how to find us, where to find us. Russian diplomats were and will be always open to any conversation, but it takes two to tango, and we can't speak to ourselves, and the diplomacy, the normal classic diplomacy, cannot be substituted by megaphone diplomacy, by naming and shaming, by kind of Twitter diplomacy, whatever. And this is a normal way how diplomats interact with each other, and we haven't changed our behavior, and we will not change our behavior. But it's up to our partners whether to shake this hand and to head for some better times, or to reject it and to face the consequences.
Thank you very much, and I truly believe that Russia perspective is underrepresented in Western media, and invite Western media teaches democracy and openness to actually gather more information and deliver this content to their audience. Thank you very much for your time.
You're most welcome.